Welcome back to ABC 24 this week. Before we get to some of the names who might be running for mayor, let's talk about just some of the overall issues here. And Susan, you were saying earlier that whether you've made it public or not, if you've decided to run for mayor, you need to have made that decision by now because the clock is ticking.
That's what I think. I think that unless you have extremely deep pockets and have tremendous name recognition already, maybe you can start thinking about it next week. But I think if you really are going to make a serious run for mayor next year, you already should have made that commitment. You should be reaching out into the community. You should have been doing your own kind of subtle campaigning and glad handing with folks who could be possible supporters who have those deep pockets. I think that there are a handful who, no, I would just say just 2 or 3 might be real serious candidates at this point, but others might want to have their names thrown out, could conceivably jump in, but won't have the chance that the others who've been preparing already.
Stephen Reed, do you agree with that? You were also sharing with me that January 30th is creeping up as an important deadline.
Yeah, so that's the first election test point. That's when filing deadline will be for financial reports will be January 30th. And I think that's going to give us an idea of who's able to raise money, who's got community support, who's going to be a front runner, and who's going to be able to contend for this title in October of 2023.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the names. The way I decided to do this is have some fun with it. We're going to use kind of a baseball metaphor, Otis.
I like baseball.
And those candidates that are on third base, all right, they've swung the bat. They're pretty serious, and they're about home in terms of making that decision and making it public.
Right.
And we think they're the most serious about running, and almost all but a foregone conclusion, I guess you would agree.
Right.
And that is Van Turner, the county commissioner, and Paul Young, who's the president and CEO of the Downtown Memphis Commission.
Right.
You agree with both of those names?
Oh, I absolutely agree. Van Turner has been running unofficially for quite some time, Richard. He's made no secret about it. And frankly, I would consider him right now, without anything else happening, as the front runner. Absolutely, I would.
Stephen, you said you dropped a poll not that long ago, and you choose good pollsters. You don't want none of these other ones that we hear about, the questionable credibility. What did your polling show, and when was it taken?
Yeah, so it was about a year ago to this day, and we put a lot of the names on there that are considering running. And there were only 2 people who even showed up in double digits, Van being the leader, Keith Norman also showing up in double digits, but Van having the lead in most demographic groups. And Otis is absolutely right. If the election were held today, Van would be the presumed winner. There was also a huge margin of error. Mm-hmm. And there's also a year of time for somebody to raise money, to get their name out there, to get issues out there, to bring out negative issues about other candidates. So, you know, it's far from saying this race is over because polls put somebody ahead when there's still potentially 70% of voters undecided. Money is always the biggest factor that's going to play into a lot of elections. Particularly one that's a nonpartisan race. No one has a D or R beside their name. We know that for sure now because the city council voted down any chance of partisan elections. So at that stage, you know, people are going to need to raise money. They're going to need to have a group of folks that are behind them, have a lot of community support. And so those numbers can certainly change. But right now, Van is in the lead.
Okay.
Absolutely right. The 2 front runners would probably be Van and Paul of the names that have said we're likely running. Paul's been out there putting out a lot of phone calls and lining up some funders for his campaign. So right now, those would probably be the 2 front runners of the names that are seriously considering running.
Okay, so let's go to the second base names now. Reverend Keith Norman, who's very active in this community, among Democratic circles in particular, NAACP, and as you just heard Stephen Reed say, does well in the polling with double-digit name recognition. Mm-hmm. We also mentioned Councilman J.B. Smiley because he has run for statewide office now, and we're hearing might have some interest in running for mayor at this point, and Sheriff Floyd Bonner. So Otis, I'll let you, Susan, why don't you let you weigh on those second base names there, Norman, Smiley, and Bonner. Who interests you?
Well, I think Keith Norman would be a good candidate. He's well known in his own circles. He's got some experience with working with government. He, I think, has a really fine position with Baptist hospitals and community relations. And he has his church. But I would be surprised if he ultimately would get into it. He's pretty influential player behind the scenes, and he doesn't have to be in the public under public scrutiny as mayor. Floyd Bonner, he just elected mayor. I don't see him doing it. I mean, people may be approaching him. He may be saying that sounds good, but at this stage, it's just a name that's being thrown out there. Just as we said earlier, I mean, Daffy Duck could say he's running at this point and be on second base. So, and the other one was J.B. Smiley. I tell you, I like J.B. Smiley for what little I know about him, but when you have a loss in your column in running for office, and you get back into another race as quickly as this would be for Mr. Smiley, I don't think that's a good thing. I think he should get a little bit more name recognition on the city council and not lean heavily on because he ran for the Democratic nomination for governor and lost.
Although he placed first in Shelby County, which is all that matters if you're running for Memphis mayor.
Absolutely, he did.
Let's talk about the first base names that we have, Otis.
Okay.
Councilman Worth Morgan, former County Commissioner J.W. Gibson, Greater Memphis Chambers Beverly Robertson, and State Representative Karen Camper. Pick one or two of those names out and why you think they're on first base.
I think, honestly, Beverly Robertson would be a very attractive candidate. I think she's made it clear that she's not interested, though. So, we're putting her on first base just because of her popularity, her leadership, and people would be thrilled if she did run. The others, their names have been thrown out there. But there are a couple that we have not put on that base yet who are on deck. And that would be Mark Luttrell and Kevin Woods. Mark Luttrell, who is now head of the Election Commission, Kevin Woods is on the Memphis Shelby County School Board. I've heard that they are thinking about it, not sure that they will run, though.
Stephen,
hey, Richard,
yeah, go ahead.
Richard, if you don't mind, let me go back to J.B. Smiley. I mean, he's a good, effective city council member, but he may have won Shelby County in the Democratic primary for governor, but running for city mayor versus some other very well-known people from the African-American community, even though you did place for, in Shelby County for governor, it's a whole different ballgame for him. And, maybe, and he's been out trying to raise a lot of money right now. It's going to be another difficult scenario for him to go back to the trough and raise some more. I'd be surprised if he gets in, but he certainly is a fine city council member.
Okay, but politicians and their egos, though. If I got more votes than anybody else among Democrats for governor, I'm thinking about it.
Yeah,
let's talk about Worth Morgan, Stephen Reed. There's this conventional wisdom out there that there's got to be a white candidate that runs who's going to slide up through the middle, and if you have too many African Americans running, that vote will be divided, and then Worth Morgan would have a decent shot. They point to Jim Strickland as an example, but you take exception to that.
I do. I think that is my right or fool's gold, because that also says that all voters are monolithic and are going to vote a certain way. First off, he doesn't get the advantage of having an R beside his name when he runs. So that doesn't mean Republicans instantly come on board with him. The other thing is I'm gonna refer back to something that happened in 1999. I call it the Pete Sisson syndrome. Pete Sisson was a candidate, very well funded, was able to write a check the same as Worth would be able to run, and he was endorsed by the Republican Party. But at the end of the day, most of those Republicans voted for Harrington because they did not want Joe Ford to win mayor that year. So you very well could see the Pete Sisson syndrome come into play in 2023 as a Republican candidate runs, but there's somebody that folks decide they don't want to see as mayor, and they end up lining up behind Paul Young or Van Turner or somebody who appeals to everybody. I'll take one step, because I didn't get a weigh in on the Floyd Bonner as a candidate. If Floyd Bonner did decide to run, which I have not heard that, and I was his political consultant in 2016, 2018 and in this past year. If he does decide to run, he moves to the front, to the head of the line immediately.
Really?
Yeah, he would. He would.
Well liked in all political circles, Republicans and Democrats. He has name recognition. He can raise money. He would instantly become the front runner in this race. I think the question is, does he want to be mayor of Memphis? Because it is not that fun a job.
I'm getting tired of time, but you know, he makes a good point. Republicans, that was the one race they chose not to run anyone against because he's so popular.
Yeah, and I've even heard that people who are even supporting Van Turner, if Floyd Bonner got into this race, they would leave Van Turner and go to Floyd Bonner. That's how well respected he is in the community. I believe he would jump to the front of the line.
Last
I'll
word,
put
Susan.
my reputation on the line right here. I'll bet that Floyd Bonner stays where he is and continues to do an excellent job.
And he probably will.
Okay. Well, that just took all the fun out of it. All right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the judicial races. Admit it, how many people did you actually know who you were voting for if you pushed for any of them when you were voting? We'll talk about that right after this.